Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the nuggets and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the conflict in Ukraine. I'm fresh off the back of some DIY, so painted hands. Nonetheless, it's time to consider the many things to wonder and ponder about concerning the war. Where should we start? Well, this is going to be a question of really semantics, of words, and in one sense, this debate doesn't really mean anything because we are, and by we, I mean the West, allies, NATO, of Ukraine, allies of Ukraine, are doing what we're doing, irrespective of what you call it. Okay, so essentially, this doesn't matter. I have said at many points that this is a proxy war. We are involved in a proxy war, and I set out even in an article why I think we're involved in a proxy war. And then quite a few people, some people agreed, some people disagreed, some people vehemently disagreed. For example, this person on one of my videos where I talked about it, it isn't a proxy war any more than pre-World War II Pearl Harbor was a US proxy. You are over your head, unsubbed. Oh, terribly sorry. So I've been unsubbed for making a point, backing up with some receipts, and not get involved in a debate. If you disagree with me, please do so. But let's talk about it here. Terje Ozerberg, who is a member, really appreciate his support. This is how to do it properly. So a proxy war. This is a quote, and in fact, I'll read you the definition, but in a second. A proxy war is an armed conflict between two states or non-state actors, one or both of which act at the instigation or on behalf of other parties that are not directly involved in the hostilities. Russia is participating directly in this war, while the West is providing weapons to Ukraine so that Ukraine can defend themselves against Russia. But no country in the West that is providing Ukraine with weapons wants this war, nor have any of these countries instigated this war. I therefore don't believe that this war meets the definition of a proxy war. I'm going to read you the definition here for this is Wikipedia, and the definitions are drawn from, in this case, Encyclopedia of the Nations of International Agreements, and what's the other reference here? My Enemy's Enemy, Proxy Warfare in International Politics, Sussex Academic Press. That's Geraint Hughes. So these are it's not just Wikipedia. You need to know how to use Wikipedia. This is from those references. Okay, a proxy war is an armed conflict between two states or non-state actors, one or both of which act at the instigation or on behalf of other parties that are not directly involved in hostilities. In order for a conflict, so it's interesting to get a little bit more detail on that. So this next sentence is really important. So I presume that Terje took that first sentence. That is that sentence he's got. But actually, next sentence is super important. In order for a conflict to be considered a proxy war, there must be a direct, long-term relationship between external actors and the belligerents involved. The aforementioned relationship usually takes the form of funding, military training, arms, or other forms of material assistance which assist the belligerent party in sustaining its war effort. Okay, the West, NATO, allies, whatever you want to call it, do all of those things, right? All of those things are done. In fact, we do, as I point out in my article, and this has now become even more validated by the recent Washington Post article that very clearly lays out the fact that the US are providing real-time intelligence for the Ukrainians to fire their HIMARS. So not only do they provide the HIMARS machines, like guided multiple launch rocket systems, they provided the missiles, the HIMARS missiles, they provide the intelligence for the targeting. Then apparently the Ukrainians go away and decide which ones to go for, and then they take that back to the Americans, who give them the coordinates for that, or veto what they can't go for. So if the Americans don't want the Ukrainians to hit that, then they will not give them the coordinates to that. So that's all been pretty much confirmed. We give them funding, we give them military assistance by giving them all sorts of equipment. We give them training, we give them military advice at strategic levels. The special forces are almost certainly involved. We basically do everything but put our own troops on the front line. Okay, so I guess the real question is, are we, and I keep saying we, the West, allies, NATO, whatever you want to say, are we in? Sorry, is this war acting on behalf of those parties that are not directly involved? Um, and is it being instigated by these parties, so which act at the instigation or on behalf? So I don't know that the West instigated this, but the key here is or on behalf of. Now, we've talked about Lloyd Austin before, mentioning last year that this is all about the degradation of the Russian forces so that they are never able to do this again. In fact, this is basically in line with the very rationale for the existence of NATO. I can't think of anything else more obviously on behalf of NATO than the war in Ukraine. You can argue this in terms. You could have argued this in terms of Afghanistan previously, like not the most recent Afghanistan, but the Cold War Afghanistan, and all these kind of other places where the Cold War was manifested in these battles between two sides, but really it was kind of like battles between the USSR and the US. Here, I just think it's so clearly on behalf of NATO. This is exactly what NATO would want. This is kind of this war is, as NATO I think would intend it to be. Will be a cause of the degradation of Russia that would lead to a long-term stability of global peace that really wouldn't have been achieved without this happening. Okay, you've got the growing strength of Russia in terms of the axis with China taking place over years, and with the growing strength of their hold on global energy. Now this is and BRICS. You can talk about BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and their kind of growing strength as a group. Well, this will largely, if Ukraine is successful, this will largely break that. I think that group up, or at least Russia's hold on global energy will be way diminished. I mean, it already is. So on and so forth. I mean, it could go on and on and on. But I really strongly believe that as according to this definition, uh, this war is a proxy war. But I don't think it really matters whether you call it a proxy war or whatever word you call it. I mean, we are doing those things, right? The other option is that if you don't call it a proxy war, I would go so far as to say that, well, okay, we're at war. We're literally at war with Russia in all but name. Well, no, in name, like in all but troops. We are like we literally everything else. Everything else is being provided by Ukraine's allies to Ukraine, and obviously Ukraine are doing all their own stuff as well. But the Ukraine is a vehicle with which NATO can achieve its kind of long-term strategic goals, and indeed the US in terms of who they think are one of their main enemies globally speaking, like historically speaking. And that may have like cooled off recently, but this has all been reignited, and I think there would be a lot of people, certainly hawkish people, but a lot of people who are involved with strategic decision making in NATO and within the allied forces, the allied nations, countries, will be thinking that this is, you will never get a greater opportunity than this, and therefore this is on behalf of our desires and intentions. This war, Ukraine are doing us all, a favor, because we don't. The favor is we don't have to. None of our troops will die. None of our citizens will die. So I think this is a proxy war. But again, if you disagree, please do so in the thread below. Bring the receipts. Do it respectfully. I just think that it really does qualify as that. Um, Again, it doesn't really matter. Uh, it's semantics at the end of the day, just words. A BMP of a Russian fascist a Russian BMP detonates on a mine laid by Ukrainian defenders here. The scene is typical of what's happening to the Russian offensive, charging ahead but going nowhere fast. Well, actually, I think the reason I'm showing you this, because I think it does tell you something, which is, imagine these mines are laid all over the front line, right? Or not even the front line, behind the front line in Ukrainian territory, and indeed behind the Russian lines, because there are reconnaissance and sabotage units just doing this all the time, all day and through the night. And this is super important because when you're talking about the Russian having an offensive now, the importance of mines should not be underestimated. You've actually had some advances of the Russian forces in this Svatova to Kremina axis, and actually Svatova to Kupiansk up here. But it hasn't been lightning fast. This offensive arguably doesn't have as many troops as it needs to have to be, really effective, and enough material. What happened in the lightning counteroffensive, the Kharkiv offensive from last year, is that the Ukrainians were able to punch through the lines. The Russians hadn't really defended those lines. They hadn't set up dug-in defences, trench networks. That was to come much later, and they hadn't mined the area, which meant that the mechanised equipment could punch holes through certain places and then rush through like thunder runs to the next sort of port of call. And they would do these thunder runs, take a load of territory, and it would be really, really quick. And the Russians wouldn't be able to react effectively to that. That won't happen again in this whole war. So the Russians have built trenches, defences all over the place, up and down the entire front line. You have trenches, dragon's teeth, and revetments and whatnot. But there will also be mines everywhere. The Russians would have mined everywhere, and the Ukrainians would have mined everywhere. And so you will have a slow, grinding offensive in these areas, I think, that will make you go, goodness me, the Russians aren't making a lot of headway at the moment. This is because the Ukrainians are putting up stalwart defense and they're doing such a good job. Actually, it might largely be due to mines. So if you're moving in a convoy, like I talked about this the other day, and one or two of your vehicles are hit by mines, you stop, everyone stops, and you're like, okay, we need to be really careful here. You get the deminers in, or you retreat, or maybe the crucial parts of your convoy have been taken out, and so therefore it's pointless moving on, and you turn around and go back, or you go another direction, you hit another mine, so you think, right, stop, get the deminers in, and that may take however long it may take. Now, it doesn't even have to be that the whole place is mined, and this is a genius of mines, is that you can just put one mine down there, and a convoy might think there are loads of mines. Someone else said on one of my threads the other days, in fact, let me find that. Here it is. So, being a pioneer reservist myself, says Volvo Good Truck, in other words, an engineer, these recon minefields are very annoying for the enemy to deal with. You will never know how big the minefield actually is. Maybe it's just one mine, etc. They've told us in Georgia during the occupation war, the Georgians basically put a lot of decoys everywhere. You could literally scatter 100 buckets and maybe 4 of them could be mined. If the enemy would discover a mine, they would have to check every bucket. This can and will instill a lot of fear and a lot of paranoia in the enemy. These are like booby traps, but works more or less like mirror images or illusions of a minefield. Crazy, huh? But yes, mines are it goes on to say they are heavy to carry, and maybe you'd only get away with carrying 2 in a backpack if you're doing these recon and sabotage moves. But that's really interesting. So you can have all these minefields set up, but they don't necessarily have to have lots of mines. You can have one mine and lots of decoys, or just one mine, or you can have 20 mines in a field. And either way, the deminers will have to slowly check through to make sure that it's safe to pass before the convoy or troops or whatever can pass through. And this makes offensives really, really slow. And I just think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of mines over the next few months, and that will go both ways. So not only is that going to be really relevant now for the Russian offensives, but for the Ukrainian counter-offensives after that, you can bet your bottom dollar that every mine Russia has will be laid, and it will be slow going. You will not see another Thunder Road like you saw back last year. Okay. Let's move on to all the techniques that Russia can and does use to generate sympathy and sentiments towards the war effort and to recruit people. Here It's religion. Russia's newest recruiting technique, a holy war against Satan. Come die in the meat grinder and Jesus will save you. Are you tempted? So here is the message seen on a wall somewhere. And what it says, the translation is, Christ, the time of judgment is coming, and only the true believers will be saved by the Lord God. It is time to fight from Satan. Only the Russian army can win this holy war. Even Lord God himself blessed the Russian people to victory. I'm not sure there's any evidence of that, actually, just in general. Join the Russian Holy Army and you will be saved by Jesus Christ. Of course, you could put up that message and change all of the Russian to Ukrainian, and there's just as much evidence that that is, it's like praying for your own football team. Yeah, please God, can my football team win this game? I mean, if you believe in God, I don't want to get into theology here and my sort of background of philosophy of religion. But if you believe in God, you pray for your team. It's not like God sitting up there and going, "Oh yeah, I wasn't thinking about Manchester United. I was thinking about Liverpool. Oh yeah, that's a good point." And then you make Manchester United win. Like that's already like laid out. It's already going to happen. And you're obviously going to use God to just try and codify or try and get theological backing for your desire for your team to win. And here, just the it's like, yeah, of course my version of Christianity is the correct one, says the Orthodox Russian Church, which is deeply involved in the military. In fact, the number one dude, Kirill, isn't it, was in the FSB. So this is a case of Putin using the Orthodox Russian Church, which he has done actually for the last sort of decade, to stoke up the culture wars, to generate a much more fervent nationalistic feeling and the kind of us and them, and look at the Americans and the liberalization in the West, liberalizing, and look at all gay rights and LGBT and yada yada yada, and getting that to be backed up by the church. So it's not just coming from governments. There's kind of theological backing for it, and then you generate that, and you coalesce around these kind of very fervent ideals and ideologies, and then use that to drive forward your agenda. Well, in this case, it's using using religion to further the agenda of mobilization here, and yeah. Interesting to see that, especially given the history of the Soviet Union as having state atheism. Right, let's do something. Let's look at something vaguely amusing here. This is North Korea, and it's not. This is nothing to do with this war, but I'm gonna. I don't know. This is the sort of thing we see from North Korea, and we've seen it a little bit with Belarusian special forces, right? Doing this. This to me is hilarious, right? This is right. I can hit a tree, hit a tree trunk. I can put a balaclava on. I can put snow on my body, and I can punch my body when snow can come off, and I can do press ups, and I can stand on my friend's stomach. And I can run through cold water, and I can pull logs. It's just like, oh man, really? Just so anyway, when I look at this, so if this ever happened in Britain, right? And I guess this is where I'm going with this. Right? This has cultural appeal. So you might look at this in North Korea or in other countries in the world, maybe Belarus, and look at this and go, yeah, damn, that's good. I want a piece of that. I want these guys are amazing. This looks good. If you showed that in Britain, like 90% of the people watching that on TV in Britain would be pissing themselves with laughter, because we are so cynical. And maybe that's a negative thing. Maybe that's a sign that actually we don't see something like that as being great, and we don't look at that as like the height of masculinity and a height of like professionalism. We look at that and we would laugh, we would take the mickey, and we would create memes, and we'll send that, because we are really a cynical nation in the UK. But our armed forces are also pretty decent, if like massively underfunded and under equipped at the moment. But we've got pretty good training, and we don't need to do stuff like that. That to me is overcompensation. So I can take the mickey out of that, and we would, and it would go down terribly if you had a UK version of that, a bunch of pasty white guys running around. Actually, no, not necessarily, but a bunch of British people running around doing that. You'd just be like, really? Um, but I think that it is, yeah, as I say, overcompensation. So there is, you would only need to do that if you're lacking otherwise. Like if you, I don't know, it's just like that false sense of bravado, just completely unnecessary. At least it would be completely unnecessary in the UK Army. There are the ways we're trying to recruit and talk about how wonderful we are. It's interesting. I was listening to a British Army advert on radio yesterday, which was talking about, and it was a woman speaking, talking about how she was flying a helicopter or whatever, or would knew that the people she was rescuing from this flood area were were cold and likely to suffer from hypothermia or something like that. And it's really interesting how the British Army recruitment at the moment is not about war and like physical strength, but it's about decision making and humanitarian. It's like our army is being sold on the value it gives to international humanitarian aid projects and things like that. And there's a really interesting difference there. But does that mean that fundamentally, in a generation's time, our army would be weaker? I mean, literally physically weaker? Would it be weaker in terms of training? I don't know. These are kind of unknown answers to those sort of questions. But yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting sidebar. Uh, this kind of thing is still happening. So just to let you know, I repeat these things because actually I've talked about this like 6 months ago. But 6 months I've got a completely different like set of people watching this, arguably or largely. And yeah, so what happens when you either don't maintain your equipment well enough or just use it too much? Things like the barrels on your howitzers. This is a Susanna self-propelled howitzer, and the barrel is basically blown off. And that is bad news because that will have to be sent back to be fixed. Now, are they not, maintaining it well enough? In which case, that's not good. Uh, or they're just using it too much. In which case, well, you can't help that. Needs must, and they're having to use these things an awful lot at the moment. But what that means is, of course, this piece of kit is then having to go out and will be out for 2 weeks plus, maybe. That'll be taken back to another European country to be fixed, almost certainly, and then sent back onto the front line. And that comes at a great logistical like expense in terms of time and cost, actually, and is not ideal. So you want to be operating things within a, a well-defined schedule of maintenance, so that actually in the long run, yeah, you might not be firing it as much, but then you won't be losing it for 2 weeks. So yeah, it's difficult to it's easy for me to say sitting here like in another country, go, well, you fired that too much, didn't you? Or you didn't look after it well enough. Obviously, you want to be firing it as much as possible, and you think more in the now and in terms of what your needs are, rather than what your needs might be in 3 weeks' time once that barrel is blown off. Anyway, there you go. That's my Ukraine war update extra. Let me know if you completely disagree and think it's a load of bunkum. Let me know if you appreciate that. As in, if you not if you appreciate it, let me know if I'm right. If you think I'm right. Because I need to correct myself. I'm no like military expert, but yeah, I guess there you go. Anyway, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. All the ways you can help my channel are in the description below, but don't feel you have to, obviously. Just watching and commenting is awesome, and thanks so much for your very astute commentary and expertise that you throw in those threads. Take care. Speak to you tomorrow. Again, I've banged on for too long in recording this, so I've split it into two. Please check out later for the second part of this to come out, where I'm going to speak about how Russia have got things wrong in their military campaign right from the beginning to now, and what they got right and what they should have learnt from previous experiences and from their successes in this war. Anyway, I do apologise if you want this all in one big one, but I think sort of 25 minutes is a much better digestible chunk.